Welcome to the Erasmus Foundation podcast. My name is Paul Nugent. Are you looking for answers to life and its meaning? Then this may well be the very podcast you need to listen to. In a series of podcasts, we are going to look at the difficult questions of life and apply spiritual knowledge to find out the answers. Hello. Today we are going to talk on the subject of fear and acceptance. And with us today, we have Erasmus from Spirit. So greetings, Erasmus.
Greetings to you.
Let's talk about fear to begin with then, because I'm wondering whether fear is real or an illusion.
Fear is real. It is real to everyone. But so often, in a way, the fear is not real. It is a fantasy. The effects of fear are real. The psychology, the psychological imprint on the person is real. But so often, a person considers or thinks of some situation which might invoke some fear. And this can build. And in reality, as time passes, they discover that their fears were not really warranted. And that has all been a grand illusion invented by the person from fear.
So what causes fear then? What is the cause of it, would you say?
I think, of course, immediately as a spirit, I would say that the fear is generated by a lack of acceptance. Acceptance that what will be in accordance with the design and will of the great mind, your God. So that is the first thing. But fear is something that is really attached to the earth, and for good reason. And of course, it has its positive nature as well, in that in enabling a person or an animal or any creature to respond to a threatening situation, the fear that is invoked then allows that person to escape as they might, to avoid what might happen. So, of course, a certain fear has an important role in life on the earth and is quite necessary.
The fear of something that may never happen is perhaps what we're talking about here today. Is that right?
I would think that is the more important issue to be discussed where all this is concerned, because there is so much fear within your world, and there is so much fear that is not necessary, which could be avoided, which is damaging. And really, in reality, the true reality has no place. So, yes, that is really what I wanted to discuss today. And that is really to do with man's lack of acceptance. The greatest fear he has is the unknown. So if in any way spirit, and myself included, can try and bring knowledge and understanding to people of the earth, to reduce their fear of the unknown. I think that would go a long way in replacing this fear with a simple acceptance.
Why do you think that some people are more fearful than others?
Well, it could be that the fear you refer to is of a nature of mental disorder, whether within the brain or the mind, but as a form of paranoia. But there is no time to discuss these points today in what we are talking of. But let us consider that so often the fear within the person, which has been invented in their own mind, really has no real founding. It has been invented through perhaps some weakness, some possible misunderstanding, or some inappropriate behavior or thoughts, which will often occur through the taking of drugs, as an example, which will cause paranoia and fears to surface. One very good reason for avoiding such practice.
Would you say that fear is harmful, Erasmus?
I would think some fear is, and I think some fear is unnecessary. And it can cause stress, of course, and stress is known to be harmful by your scientists of the earth. It has been known to promote some illnesses and is certainly not conducive to healing where cancer is concerned. It is very damaging in that way.
I'm just wondering whether people are more afraid today than they have been in the past. Do you think it's something that's grown amongst the population?
Yes, I think, yes. Of course, people have always had good reason to fear, especially in times of war and aggression, of course. But even in your world today, right across your earth, there are, of course, some places where there are areas of conflict and war taking place, which of course invokes a fear. But that is, in a way, a different type of fear. That is a fear which needs courage and strength to manage, of course, and has its purpose and its meaning. But generally speaking, most people across the earth are experiencing fear, I would say unnecessarily sometimes, as a matter of pressures and the stresses of life, which impose unreal pressure and burdens upon people's lives and their way of lives.
I'm just wondering, as you're talking, what the biggest fear is. I suspect it may be the fear of death in most cases.
Yes, that is quite possible. In certain circumstances, of course, through the lack of knowledge of spirit and what happens on death of the earth. But I wanted to say, for my view of people of the earth, when we scan, very often one of the most common, or perhaps the greatest fear within mankind is the fear of failure. And because of the pressures, because of the requirements of people to enable them to survive comfortably and in the best possible way, very often that requires that they are successful in so many aspects of life, which is burdensome and creates stress. So I think I would suggest that is the number one issue which man should contemplate and address.
So the pressures that we put upon ourselves is what you're saying then, Erasmus,
Oh,
rather
indeed. Indeed. Yes.
we're our own worst enemies, it seems to be the
Mm-hmm.
case. Okay, so how would people, do you think, in the future perceive fear? Would they look back at it and wonder at why we behaved in such a way?
Yes, I think people do today when they've passed through a time of anxieties and fears, and they look back and very often will find that what they were most fearful of has turned out to be quite a good situation. And even sometimes when something is due to happen, which is to cause fear, and we pass that time and situation, and in the future we reflect, look back, and think, well, perhaps that wasn't such a bad situation in the end, and it did me good, as it turned out, that what I have now, what I do now, as a consequence of that event, which I was so fearful of, has led me into this much better place I am in now. And that does happen to people. So again, it teaches one that sometimes what we fear is unnecessary, but what we lack more than anything is a sense of acceptance. Accepting that what will happen is beyond our control, is going to happen regardless of what we do, what we believe, and how we might change or try to change events in our lives. That what will be, will be. And if we can find acceptance with this, stop trying to fight and just simply, by subjugation of self, accept what will be, and must be. Therefore, for our benefit, or for a greater benefit of the whole, that is how we should think, and that is how we should learn to accommodate our fears.
So we are talking about acceptance here as being the solution to our problem here on Earth, to find more acceptance. So how would you define acceptance, Erasmus?
I would suggest to you that acceptance is simply knowing that all that is planned and ordered within the universe, in accordance with the natural law, is controlled and designed by the will of the great mind. That cannot be altered, and that simply is. And therefore, every spirit, whether living in a humanoid body or at home or elsewhere, must come to the realization that everything is under the order of the great mind. And therefore, all one needs to do is to be. Simply be.
Now, that's a podcast in itself, Erasmus. How to
Indeed,
be.
how to be.
Indeed. So, again, going back to the fear once more, because I was just thinking as you were talking, one of the fears that people have is the fear of change.
Yes.
And they are very concerned because they're quite comfortable in the position they're in now, position one. And all of a sudden they have to change to position two. And in that change, there's concern, there's worry, there's a fear that the second will not be as good as the first.
No. And that is the fear of unknown.
Yes.
Which is always a fear. And people will have that within their minds, or they will find acceptance. And that is their choice. Perhaps it is a freedom of choice at times within their life. But knowing that position two is not to be avoided, it is going to happen regardless, then surely logic must state all one can do is accept what will be. And as I said before, so often position two turns out to be so much better, greater advantage, more to learn by, and a greater benefit than we had perhaps considered previously as a possibility.
Acceptance, as far as I'm aware, is not something that is easily attained, is it, Erasmus? It's something that takes a lot of effort and testing and issues in life to change your views. All this, the whole process of living can change in an instant, and all of a sudden you reach this position of acceptance. It's not something you can give to another, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it is not something you can give, of course. It is something you may have, which is rightly yours. But I would say, if I may be a little contentious, by arguing one point, to say that I believe acceptance is very simple. It might be hard and difficult for some to find acceptance, but it is there, very simple, when one really has the belief, the faith, the understanding, the knowledge that the great mind is there, your God is there, and your God rules this universe. Of course, there are freedoms of choice within people's lives, but inevitably, everything is within an order, a design, a grand plan, and you and I and all others are a part of that grand plan. And we might work together, we might have some link together, but we are all part of the grand plan of things. And once man accepts this, he will find it more easier to manage his fears.
Thank you, Erasmus. Coming to the end of a podcast again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, I think I've covered everything I wanted to say. And I would just like to say that acceptance is perhaps more important than people might realize. And I think, if anything, that would be the message I would like to put across today.
The Erasmus Foundation is a spiritual teaching and healing foundation based in Laxfield, Suffolk, in the United Kingdom. We have a webpage, www.erasmus-foundation.org. If you would like to be a guest on our podcast, or indeed have further questions for us, then please contact me on paul@erasmus-foundation.org, and we'll do our best to accommodate you. Thank you very much for listening.